But I really enjoy Oscar Wilde in every sense of it, but Shaw is sort of like, am I going to go again and not see a Shaw?
But every medium, because my students and I often have conversations about film, television, and theater, and really understanding that each one does something really well. And there's something else it doesn't necessarily do as well. And the problem with Shaw, he's brilliant, and he's a brilliant writer. Some of that is a lot more fun to read. We don't go to the theater to be lectured to.
Yes.
That does not work. Even medieval theater, when the church brought back theater, and they brought it back as propaganda, as a teaching tool, they still understood they had to entertain you or you weren't going to pay attention.
Some of the things that I think, from reading the book that were the most entertaining to me, and thus I think to other people, were the stories of the famous. Anytime I'm bartending and saying like, oh yeah, like Richard Nixon was here and there's a bunch of others in the foyer, they'll run over there and scamper back and pick names. So I think you're the best chance for us not to have a filter that has grown in legend over the years as it's been retold. So give me Nixon first.
Well, Nixon, and keep in mind, of course, I'm only getting my information from the people at the time. For the people here, they were doing a frolic, and it was just like he just showed up. They didn't know he was coming. He was in town, and I just read this, and I don't remember. I wanted to say he was talking about the arms race or something along those lines, and one of the players was a former governor. He was in politics, so he was coming as his guest, per se. And actually, they said he was incredibly personable and very friendly, and he stopped and told stories, and they felt like he was just a regular guy. And in some ways, I think the impression I got from what I was reading is that he was familiar with club life, and he liked being able to just hang out with a group of people and not have to be quite so on, not have to be the person playing, because there were a whole bunch of people already playing, and that wasn't his job. He could just mingle and enjoy himself instead of have to be the entertainment.
That's wonderful. Do you know at what point in his political career?
He was vice president at that point.
Okay. Who would come to mind next in terms of the most famous, in that sliding scale between most famous and best story?
Best story. Some of the best stories are just the player stories of the standard theater, what went wrong and what part of the costume fell off. Bert Lahr, because that is my favorite, and how cranky he was. He was not happy to be there, and he was not going to put on a show for anyone. Nixon came and understood that he could just be personable and talk to people, and that's all they really wanted. Bert Lahr thought that he was going to have to be the performer, and he was very unhappy about that, very grumpy. And there's this wonderful photo somewhere of him slouching in a chair and just looking miserable. I don't know how you can be miserable at a frolic. I don't know how anyone can be miserable at a frolic. Somebody didn't give him enough beer. I don't know what happened.
It would fall into the category of, why did you come?
Yes, exactly. And then there are the not necessarily as famous, but I also enjoy the stories of when a touring show would come through town and they would host some of the people from the show at a frolic or at an afterglow, and they would often put on parodies of their shows. So you get D'Oyly Carte, which was kind of the premier, and I think might still be the premier Gilbert and Sullivan Company, was coming through town. So they hosted a few people, and because they were doing HMS Pinafore, the Gilbert and Sullivan Company, they did a show that was about a distressed American looking for the water closet, because they thought that the maritime theme carried through. They did a spoof of Annie for some of the cast members of it when it came through. And that was kind of fun to see the shows that they would put on for these professional performers. And apparently the professional performers really enjoyed the fact that somebody was performing for them. It was fun for them to laugh about the show.
That a thing of bygone days, the traveling, I realize plays still come through town, but on a smaller scale that was supported in decades past?
I think so, and sometimes it was just the connection. Somebody knows somebody else, and that's how somebody would be who would work for the theater, manage the theater, and they would go to the performers, who are often, I have a friend who works touring shows, they would love something to do because they're in a strange place, and the idea of somebody inviting them out to a party when I was in grad school at Michigan State, oh my goodness, I'm trying to remember which company. I think it might have been Fiddler on the Roof. Somebody, because we shared theaters, or two theaters side by side, somebody just invited one of the performers and said, hey, any of you guys who want to come out, we're having a party this evening. Half the cast showed up. So they're so excited and to be around other theater people. Creative people like to be around other creative people and get to talk and laugh and socialize. And theater people are so welcoming. No matter where you are, if somebody finds out you're a theater person, the instantaneous conversation, instantaneously trying to get you involved. And you just get welcomed into the family. So there's something really enjoyable about that, particularly for a company that's traveling through and they're far away from home. Doyley Carts was from London, so they were particularly far from home.
Do you know if the makeup of players over the first century was, at one time a great deal of people with theater backgrounds, college and whatnot? Now it seems to be more of a social club.
It has always been fairly limited in the number of people. There have been some major people who are involved who might have written plays, although some of them it almost seems like it was their time at Players that got them writing plays. They might have been journalists to start and had somewhat of an interest in theater, but they did so much for Players. Al Weeks is a good example. The stuff I know of that, the show he took to Broadway, he took after he was working here, after he was writing stuff for this theater. So I think in many ways they got to kind of cut their teeth here with a very welcoming audience and then go on to do that, kind of gave them the kick they needed to get started.
Honing the craft by...
Very much so. And
doing it.
you've had a mix of industrialists, people, there were plenty of people who were members who were just here to enjoy the theater. They were not necessarily working on the shows, whether backstage or on stage. But then you also had your journalists, you had people who were involved in the arts in various capacities, who might be on the board of the museum. So they had a love for the arts in various ways, and this was just another expression of their creativity. For some of them, this was their chance to be creative because they had jobs that were so precise in what they had to do that this was their chance to kind of let loose.
Interesting. There was some of their names, and I did not refresh my memory. David Ogden Steers,
Yes,
from MASH.
and that was another one. This is because you're collecting stories. I cannot tell you how important it is, and people don't think about this, to tell these stories, because the only way I've come across any of these is I'm reading a copy of The Player, or I'm reading something in the Board of Governors minutes. So these stories, that's how I find my information. Somebody 20 years later talking about a performance going, oh yeah, and I'd read at the time what happened during it. So I don't know how they managed to get him here, but I'm sure somebody knew he was in town, said, hey, come on down to Players. Well, what's Players? You'll understand when you get there, come on.
There's a time when I think there was, and you'll probably know, I don't have to know the numbers
Maybe
because
not.
you may. But no, I think that and as we stand in at the end of 2013, I believe we have 120, 125 members, and I believe at one time it was something like 250 with another 130 who were associate memberships or something. They couldn't appear on stage, and Edsel Ford. You had names that people knew.
Yes.
Like the Edsel Fords, and I always like that, in the John Lodge, you'll be walking through the Playhouse and you'll see a name and you'll be like, hey, wait a minute, I wonder if that's the guy the freeway is named after. And is it?
Yes.
And
Yes. And one of my favorite theater, the things gone wrong in the theater is Lodge, because he came in, somebody told a story long after this happened. They were collecting, and I can't remember for which anniversary, stories of theater mishaps. Instead of, how did the Playhouse get built kind of story, this was the what went wrong in the theater. And apparently Lodge had come in the back door, slipped on the steps, fell and knocked his head. So somebody yells for a doctor, and they think it's a joke. So they come on stage, and there are a whole bunch of doctors standing around, looking at Lodge on the floor, joking about what's wrong with him until they realized there was actually something wrong. It was okay, he just managed to knock himself out. But as the person who was relating the story, probably in a copy of The Player, then said, so next time you're stuck on the Lodge, you can think of this happening to him, and you'll feel a little bit better.
he was on the steps, or
He was coming down the steps from the impression I get, because they said it was right next to one of the, I think it was the stage left one of the Winningham vases. So he just was coming down the steps, slipped. So he's laying there right near the vase, and they come thinking it's some kind of joke and had no idea. So yes, John Lodge was unconscious on the stage for a little while.
And you actually know the origin of the vases?
The origin of the vases, when they originally opened the C.C. Winningham, I want to say he also wrote a play or two for Players, and I'm trying to remember, I think he was involved in advertising. I'm forgetting, I could look it up. There used to be two Art Deco statues where those are but not long after, and you can see them in the 1925 booklet of the Playhouse, but within a year or two, it happened really, really early, those were replaced, and it was C.C. Winningham that donated them, and Corrado Parducci, who did the gargoyles on the front, designed and made the vases for here.
Okay.
I think, I'm not sure, that nothing in the records ever said why they wanted to do that, but if you see the very thin, they're kind of a spiral-shaped Art Deco statues, and you see these look more appropriate to the space than those did. Although some of the accoutrements, some of the metalwork actually came out of, they were salvaged. Some of it was salvaged from the Ritz-Carlton in New York City, and there were some other places that they salvaged some of the materials for that came into this space.
I can read the name of the painter, but I'm sure I would butcher the pronunciation.
Oh, Di Lorenzo? or no,
Honore?
Honore.
Honore.
Honore,
Okay.
the murals, the tapestries.
You know, when you Google Honore, our work comes up. It seems like it was a fairly limited production. There's some carvings, the wood plate sort of carvings that were pretty famous, maybe on a women's suffrage pamphlet or something like that.
Okay.
I seem to remember that. Were these original?
Yes, they are original. They were made, they were ordered, they were requested. There were 4 players who came up with the money to pay Honore to create these tapestries based on the idea of traveling players. So you've got kind of the traveling caravan of performers, which may or may not have been a kind of a inside joke for them, because they had gone from theater to theater to theater before they were able to build this space for themselves. And they even at the time would joke about that. They were at the Arts and Crafts Little Theater for a long time until, it's not very clear, but they kind of got kicked out for a little while, probably because they were breaking things and burning things, because there was constantly this notes coming up in the player saying, please be careful with the china, please don't set your cigars on the chairs, and you kind of get the idea that they were doing a little bit of damage, and Arts and Crafts got a little cranky, so they were at the Harmony Society for a year. They were in a couple different places. They were at the 20th Century Club for a while, and then when they finally got to get in this space, so many different things were donated, because, and you talk about Edsel Ford. Edsel was associate member. He didn't want to perform. He loved the arts, but he wasn't on stage. But he was one of the linchpins of donating money to get this space built.
Really?
So, yes.
Any other noteworthy people that I might have missed in my...
Oh, goodness. Well, if you look, Early Players is essentially littered with names of people involved in the automotive industry. Some people you automatically know, like one of the Dodge brothers, one of the Fisher brothers. And then people, once you start reading about them, you know exactly what they were involved in, or they were hugely influential in the government of either the city or, there were 2 or 3 people who became governors who were members of Players. We had a U.S. Senator, Cousins. Cousins is a good example. James Cousins was a little bit of everything, but he worked with Henry Ford. He was a member of this club and mayor of the city. He was a senator for many, many years. The Newberrys, if you look at the 4 families in not early Detroit, but if you're looking at kind of 1900s, you had the Algers, the Joys, Newberrys, and as I'm completely forgetting. But we had, I think Macmillan was the other. We had a Joy, we had an Alger, we had 2 of the Newberrys. This was Newberry land, in fact.
Really?
Yes. There was more than one site. They were considering a couple different sites. One of the other sites, and I'm forgetting which street it was on, was not in this location. Another one was along Jefferson. I don't think they ever said the address of the site, so I can't tell you exactly what it was. And it hit the point where they said, we've got 2 possibilities. This other piece of land on Jefferson, because this was kind of the main drag, this was a good place to be, and then the Newberry land. And they said if the Newberry land will sell at at think it was Miller, at the Miller rate, we'll take the Newberry land in deference to, that them having a connection with Players already. So, and Newberry was also involved in politics. The families are involved in various things. You'll see buildings at Wayne State named after Newberrys and Joys. So they were the thing that becomes so important about a lot of these organizations is not It's not I don't consider it an old boys club, but it is that these people meet each other and they encourage each other to do things. So somebody is supporting the Detroit Symphony Orchestra and they're like, wait, you're creative people, you like the arts, why don't you come out and help us with that? So you see all these connections between the cultural institutions and people who really made them happen. The Detroit Institute of Arts would not still be open if Edsel didn't put up money during the Depression, period. He happened to know Nelson Rockefeller. Nelson Rockefeller introduced him to Diego Rivera, which is why we have the Rivera murals. And they wanted them, once they were finished, a lot of people were very excited about the murals because they really reflected, supposedly Henry Ford was just thrilled because it really records the process actually pretty accurately. So a lot of the workers on the line were happy, Henry Ford was happy, but then they find out Rivera's a communist and people were up in arms. And bless his heart, Edsel says, stop, wait. Because a communist has painted the walls of our, oh my God. He said, let history decide. Don't do anything, leave them alone. Let history decide. I know what you think now. And of course, this is one of the big draws for the museum now. And what's interesting about this, about a year before, this is why Nelson had known Diego, Nelson had asked him to put a mural on the wall of the Rockefeller Center. Well, if you go to the Rockefeller Center, that mural isn't there anymore. It got chipped off the wall, quite literally. Because of, now admittedly, I understand why he did it, because some of the politics involved in it. So they don't have a Rivera, but we do, because we had somebody who was pretty far-sighted.
It was wonderfully portrayed in a movie recently that's escaping me. It might have been the Frida Kahlo.
Well, there's the Frida Kahlo, but if you also, it's a little bit, it's not older, it's just not recent. The Cradle Will Rock, which talks about the Federal Theater Project. Tim Robbins, who directed it, is also kind of talking about art in support of people and art in a political vein, and he uses that, even though he's talking mostly about the Federal Theater Project, he also brings in the whole bit of what Diego Rivera was doing and the relationship with Nelson Rockefeller. So that was an interesting thing to see, particularly in contrast to what happened here and what happened there.
Because I'm a lawyer by trade and obviously not an interviewer, what I'd like to do, if we can just sort of switch it up a bit,
Sure.
is introduce yourself and tell us about where you work, what you do, and what projects you've done, including books.
My name is Marijean Levering. I'm originally from Detroit. Right now, I am an associate professor of theater at Utica College in Utica, New York. So obviously, I do a lot of teaching of theater. Because of my research here, and that's really what I started my research on, my research primarily focuses on social clubs and theater, because I find it fascinating both what people would choose to do, how they used it, and Players is probably one of the best examples, what they wrote for themselves. Because you get such a sense of, it might be just that group's reaction to something that's happening in society or the culture or politics at the time, but it's fascinating to see something on the ground that's a reaction that is not a newspaper editorial, it's not an interview of some kind, it's just somebody's response to what's going on. I'm particularly fascinated by what people would do either in times of war or during the Depression. That is absolutely fascinating. There are several good plays, and if there's one thing I can urge players to do is read the scripts written by other players. There's some amazing work in there. I read about 100 scripts a year. Most of them are awful. That's the truth. And then there are ones that are great, but I just can't produce them because we don't have the skill set. My job is teaching theater. I also direct, of course, mostly academic theater because that's what takes up my time. As I was mentioning earlier, I'm now working with New York State as a role player coach, as a makeup artist, helping with live simulations for training of first responders. So disaster training, emergency training, everything from a tornado has hit to a building has collapsed to, there's a sniper. So that's also a really interesting way to take what I know from theater and use it in a broader context, and we're trying to get our students involved in this too, so they get to use it in a broader context also. So that's also been kind of interesting and fun.
Is the theater background always related to the social clubs and the study or the survival of some, of the thriving of some with the failing of others, or is that something you were particularly interested in?
That was something I was interested in, only because I wanted to see with the social clubs, because again, until I had started studying players, I didn't know much about them. I think that this group has survived in part because of theater. And if you look at some of the older organizations, now, did a ton die off? Yes, a ton died off. Then also there are ones that went from being essentially private clubs like this to being community theaters, and that's a very different animal. It's a very different animal from what happens here. But then you also have the Friars still exist, the Lambs still exist, Hasty Pudding at Harvard still exists, the Bohemian Club out in San Francisco still exists. So you've got to have something within these organizations, because so many clubs died. They died because society changed. As I was rereading my own material to prepare for this, I was really thinking about a lot of the clubs, and this is across the board, whether they were involved in theater or not, a lot of the clubs that built spaces for themselves in the 20s, it tanked them in the Depression because they still had the debt and weren't able to survive it. And that's part of what just decimated the club. The Depression helped, but that was part of it. But you had such investment and involvement in this space. When it's theater, you live here. This isn't, I'm showing up to have a drink at the club. It's not that the traffic hour is a good chance for people to socialize, but you live here. And there's something about that very ephemeral, fleeting creation of theater and being involved in that. This is why people talk about the shows that they've seen, because they know that even people who have seen that show in another context, it's not the same. They saw something special in that one moment, and you know it. So you have an investment in this club, in this space, in a way that you don't in some place that you go and read a newspaper and have a glass of brandy. Or even some place where you might go and socialize. But the socialization that happens when you're working on a show is very different than I'm going to go hang out in a room with a bunch of people. You're all working towards a common goal, which doesn't normally happen in the other contexts. In this, you're all striving. There's a deadline you've got to pull together. Even the people in the audience know that, and they're rooting for you to get it right. And that's a very different experience and a very different investment for everyone than just someplace you go to be social or be friendly.
So the inclusion of new members into the actual process, or the recruitment and inclusion early on, would be something, if you had 5 minutes to advise the board with all of your study as to what would be the most important things, it sounds like if we want to be here after another century, inclusion into actual being on the stage, backstage.
You have to as fast as possible. The stories that I was told, the stories that I have read, Henry Nelson's is a good example. So he was talking to a friend from work, and the friend said he was going to go and have a drink at his club. He was going to the traffic hour. And he comes to traffic hour, and of course, this is one of the best selling points for this institution. You see this building, you're like, oh my God, this is wonderful. What happens here? And then you see the caricatures, and then you really say, wait, what happens here? So he's there with his friend, he's having a beer, he's socializing with all these great people, and they start talking to him about theater, and they're like, well, hey, are you interested? They were just starting work on the producers, their version of it. Long before the Broadway one ever existed, they created their own. They literally threw him on stage with his beer still in hand. He said, that's when I got my first, direction on the player's stage. I was told to finish my beer as fast as possible. He wound up being one of the chorus girls, so he wound up in a body stocking with tinsel and some huge wig, and he was just hooked. He got involved, and he was part of that process. And so many people, that's what I would read, that something happened early on. They were involved in a show, one of the venerable, senior people in the club took them under their wing, but they felt like they were part of it. They need to feel like they're involved and they're part of it. If they don't, why would they stay? And you don't always want to, because it is such a close-knit group, you don't always feel right breaking in. You have to be pulled in. So when somebody invites you in, somebody pulls you in, whether they do a rookie show, although I think it's also good to involve them with other people so they get to know as many people as possible quickly. Because then it's, somebody who's been here for a little while going, oh, so yeah, Joe, let me introduce you to Joe. Joe's new. Here's what he was doing with us. He's great. Why don't you use him in your show? And you start to become part of the community. You become part of the family. And I think that's really important, doing that as quickly as possible. And one thing, because I know we talked about this before, whether or not, and I don't know if they ever made a decision on this, whether or not to let families see final dress, which one of the first times that question came up was in 1952.
Have we waffled back and forth on certain things as a group?
But you also can go back to the earliest days of the club, and families have always been involved. That's why you have so many people who are supportive of players who aren't even necessarily, I'm never going to be a member. I think this place is wonderful and I want to help it continue. They were helping with the costumes, they were helping with the sets, they come in and help clean up. They would do things in support of their person who was on stage, just like we all come out and see, we go out and see our friends who are doing a community theater show, no matter how painful it is. But we go because we know it's important and we know that their investment and their time means something and it matters. So respecting that and valuing that is important.
I'm going to redo that from my stomach. And then this experience that people feel in coming to the Playhouse and having this thing, how much is it? I think the other things, I don't think they've ever seriously talked about, because there's already a co-ed group and there's already an all-women's group. So the fact that we own the building, it's not really exclusionary in that old
Nope.
boy Archie Bunker kind of way.
Never has been.
But if somebody opened up the, hey, we should have women here, or hey, we should relax the dress code because it's 2013.
No, don't do that. You want to talk about relaxing the dress code, read what they say about the 70s and the frilly colored tuxedos and the horror involved in that. Part of what's important about this is the unique experience. If it's something you can get anywhere, then why come here? You've got history and tradition, and the Tux not only says this is an important event, it also says we're all part of the same group. It's a recognition of the effort and the specialness of the occasion. When you stop and think about it, most of these shows, that is the only time they're going to be formally performed. It's that one time and done. That's it. You know, we're not doing 6 or 7 performances of this. Maybe it makes May, maybe it makes an invitational, but there's no guarantee of that. So that knowledge that you're participating in something that is here and gone, but also you're part of this story. In another 12 years, this building will be 100 years old. And all the performances, I mean, the list, literally, if you were to look at a list of all the plays done here, year after year after year, you have to, with any organization, you have to decide what is important that you keep and what is willing to be flexible. You should be flexible and change. And so I'm sure some of the makeup of players now is a lot more broad than it would have been in 1915. So that's where they have decided, you know, your love of theater and your commitment to this, that's what's important. But if you get rid of all those traditions, then what is special about this? And as for involvement of women, might that happen sometime in the future? It's possible, but there's nothing wrong. We talk about, you know, the guys' night out or the girls' night out, and we never have a problem with that. We don't think much of that. But there's nothing wrong with a group of people getting together and hanging out. No one here is plotting at how the future of Detroit is going to run. No one here is trying to exclude somebody from a job. You know, there's no plotting for the alien invasion happening. This is about a bunch of people getting together and a chance to be social and comfortable and take risks. Getting on stage is about taking risks. And you need some sort of cohesion to make that okay, to make it a supportive enough environment. And I don't see, because there is so much involvement with fine arts, with theater arts, with family members, everybody knows everyone else. I'm a perfect example. I'm female. I'm not going to be a member of the club. I don't feel excluded. I think it should exist. I think that camaraderie and the community that it creates is important and valuable. And institutions that do things like that are important to a community. That's what helps support a community. Detroit's struggling. It's been struggling for a long time. This is not new for Detroit. But without people who are invested in a place, who really want to see it succeed, and there are plenty of examples of that happening right now. The national story is, oh, Detroit, bankruptcy. But the local stories are, you know, this person has, you know, put up money for ambulances. This person has invested this in Detroit. This person is moving their business to Detroit. This person is starting a business in Detroit. So that investment in the community, you need little linchpins that are going to stabilize and keep people there. And despite all of the trials and tribulations and all of the changes, societal changes, period, that have happened, this place has remained. And that says something. And that means also that the investment of people has remained. And is it as large as it was when it started? No, but most clubs aren't. because society changed. The height of clubs was the 19-teens into early 1920s, and then society changed radically. So the purpose they served doesn't exist in the same way that it did before. But this was not like those general clubs. This was a place to be creative. This was a place, you asked about whether there were theater people. There were some, but there were also somebody who owned a sheet music company, somebody who owned the opera house. So they had an interest in it. But a lot of people, and then there were people who were, a lot of the early advertisers in this area started, they were at the club, and this was when they were just getting started. So this was a lot of times a chance for people to step out of that shell and be creative in a way that they didn't necessarily get to be creative. And sometimes you get fabulous things on stage. Inside Detroit, 1950, somebody is, I'm trying to remember who wrote that one, Snyder, I think. And it has this wonderful satire on the Ford Company and the AFL-CIO, and this crazy thing that happens. You've got the people from the union, and you've got one of the people who's in administration, and the names are barely changed to protect the innocent or the guilty as you see it. And one of the members of the club was actually head of Park Davis, and they joked that there was something gone wrong with the Park Davis plant, and it put a strange chemical into the air and made everyone change. So suddenly the administration of Ford was going, Ford Motors, is saying, no, you only have to work one day, but we'll pay you for a month. And the people on the union side are going, no, we'll work 18-hour days, you don't have to pay us at all. And they wind up, the guys in charge of Ford Motors give the union people the keys to the kingdom and say, no, you're in charge now, we'll work the line. And then they, of course, because this is Players, they seal the deal with a drink, which cancels out this strange drug in the air, and then they realize what's happened. So now suddenly the administration no longer has control of the building, and they're saying, well, we're not going to work unless you agree to all of our terms, and you have to do the following things, which are all the things the union would have wanted. The union's saying, we're never going to do that. We're going to get people to kick you out of the building. We're hiring all these, and it's hysterical, because it's the same thing. This is 50 years ago, and it's the same thing that's happening. So reading these plays and seeing that, and knowing that people from the club were involved in this, that makes it a little bit different to me. It gives it a whole new level of involvement.
You've read all the plays at least up until the publishing of Players on Stage?
Unfortunately, no. There were some, because there's so many.
Right.
As I would go through the players, so I would read the player and I'd say, oh, that sounds like an interesting show. And particularly, sometimes I would know of a show because it was a widely done show. And sometimes because of the subject matter, I really wanted to read the play. But there were plenty of player-written scripts I have not gotten to. So I've read ones that really caught my attention. As I said, I was also particularly interested in responses to like World War I, World War II, the Depression, Prohibition.
Oh, yeah.
That makes me giggle.
13 years. I looked it up. I couldn't believe it. I thought maybe it must be 2.5 tops, something like that. 13 years.
We don't move very quickly, and it was doomed from the start, particularly with the Hiram Walker plant across the river. Detroit was never going to participate in Prohibition. It was too easy to bootleg. But you also get these plays. So there's, when liquor first became legal again, there's a play called The Cabinet Meeting, and I think it was El Weeks that wrote it, I think. It's FDR's cabinet meeting where he says, this is what I'm going to do for the common man. I'm going to give him back beer. And they ended by the whole cabinet has a drink. The whole audience gets served a drink. So this response right at the moment, right at the time, and some of the plays about the Depression are hysterical. They're funny. You wouldn't think a musical about the Depression would be something, but they're really, really funny. But it is also, the more things change, the more they stay the same. There's one, and I'm forgetting the title of this one, but it's a take on all the alphabet agencies that existed during the Depression, and this real pushback against it, with business feeling like there was just too much meddling and it was just causing problems. So this poor guy who runs a lunch counter, they come in and say, we're going to shift the stools around to make more room for people. You're not accommodating left-handers enough, and all these things. And this poor guy, by the end of it, is practically tearing his hair out. And the very last setup he winds with, and he goes through all these permutations with all the stuff he's forced to do, is the exact same setup he had when he started. That works today. That play works now. So that is also seeing something that was written, that one was early 30s, I think, that you could still do now, that still rings true. I find that very fascinating too.
Favorite authors? Player
Weeks,
authors?
Lee Anderson wrote a play that I really like, In the Thousands of Years to Come, which was both a take on prohibition and kind of their comment about the new woman of the 20s. Bud Pierce wrote a couple. Snyder, who did, and I want to say it was Snyder who did Inside Detroit. But these, Conkey was another person. So you've got all these really great authors. You have several people who really were, and sometimes they were journalists, sometimes they were advertising people in their everyday lives. But then they would write stuff for the stage that just, Sheldon and Noble worked as a team, and they'd do music and lyrics and book for a show. And again, a lot of this stuff, it was once. And it has gone into the files. If they're still in the office, there's, drawers of scripts.
They are.
Mimeographed, onion paper, and with some of this, it's part of the joy of doing historical research is when you get to handle or look at something that's truly original. So these scripts, and you can see the notes where things have gotten changed, either by the author or with somebody in the cast. You can tell with somebody in the cast who lines got changed and they switched things around. And that makes it real. That makes it live. That's one of the great things here is you're never that far separated from even people who were here in 1920. Somebody knew somebody who heard a story about Sam Slade or Al Weeks, and some of it grows in the telling. But I think it's also as interesting to see, it was fun for me to see, okay, here's as close to the original story as I can get, and here's the story that's being told, and what that says about what people think and what people are interested in, or what the club's about, as to how those stories have expanded over time.
Weeks got his start in Players as a playwright, or
I don't think he was a journalist. He worked for the news. I think he also worked for the Free Press. But I had no indication that he had written plays prior to being involved in Players.
And he made a Broadway.
He made it to
wrote
Broadway.
A Broadway play.
Yes.
Did he make a living there, or did he get one play done? I mean, not that getting one play done is amazing.
It's a big deal. I think he tried to continue to write, but I think he was still mostly based here. I think he still continued. He was involved with something in Hollywood, and I'm forgetting what. But it was that was kind of the, so he got involved here, eventually gets a play to Broadway. He did something in Hollywood, and I can't remember whether it was script writing or something along those lines. The man who wrote the scripts for the Lone Ranger, which started here as a radio program, was a member of Players. So I think they joined him up while he was working, because they said, oh, this is a creative person, he'd be great for us. But you see all these connections. There were people who were publishers.
Anybody else make take a hobby and turn it into something on either coast?
Not
or is
that there. You would see some people who would wind up working in these things, but they already had a foot in the door, so I can't give that all to Players. But so many people, they were here. They had their first love in whatever they were doing, whether that was being an engineer, whether that was working in advertising. And then this was for play. So in some respects, if you look at theater clubs that were founded by theater people, primarily theater people, they very seldom put on shows, if at all.
Okay.
They don't do theater because that's what they do for their day job.
Right.
So it's not fun for them. That isn't play for them. So this was, even though there were some people who were involved in entertainment in whatever way, shape, or form, this was still play. This was their chance to do the things that they couldn't do, to try out the thing that they would never do, to get on stage even though that isn't what they were going to do. And some of them become quite good at it. I mentioned one of the playwriting teams. Sheldon, I want to say, did titles. You had, very, very different day jobs for some of these people. Some of them you can really advertise it, you can see the connection. And then others they were a doctor, they were a lawyer. One of the members was a lawyer in the Nuremberg trials. And they don't necessarily, and that's what's very difficult sometimes about trying to determine some of these things. God bless the internet, it's getting a little bit easier now, but trying to find the information if you don't know to look for it, because most of the time, because Players was about This is our chance to relax and enjoy and create. They don't speak much about somebody's day job.
No, I've been surprised in the past to be looking up a number or trying to Google somebody and say, wow, he's a professor at Wayne State, or you know, I know we have meters, brewers, you know, working artists. If you talk about the player's experience, to get out of, you know, my normal life and circle of friends as a lawyer, you know, you can certainly walk in these doors, but they're not going to tell you a lot of times.
And
People come in here and it's the conversations are players related or, you know, current events. It's not so much, hi, I'm a professor at Wayne State, what do you do? I don't have that experience down here at all.
No, but that's one of the things that's different, and what has worked for this club that would be different in just a straight social club, where it is very much, who are you, what do you do, who do you know? That isn't, you know, what shows have you done, what authors do you like, have you tried out doing something backstage yet? It's a very different conversation. And I really do feel like people are judged, because some of the people that were really valued by the club weren't necessarily the powerful movers and shakers at any given time. They were people who were, some of them were, and you'd find out all this stuff about them and then would go, wait, you were a judge? I didn't know you were a judge. Because all of the stories you hear about them directing or something they did on stage, and that's what's valued. What do you contribute to this environment? What do you contribute to the activity of the club? That's what we care about. You know, for Sam Slade, who did actually work as an actor, he was a voice teacher. That was his day job. He was a voice teacher. But he did work as an actor. He's one of the few that you can really see the straight connection between what he did and what he would do here. But they adored him. They really venerate Sam Slade. And you can look at all these multimillionaires on the roll at the same time as Sam Slade. They're not talking about them. They're talking about him, because he was involved.
What else does it take to make your name be on a dressing room door? I believe there's a Forsythe.
Forsythe, well, Forsythe directed, and if I remember correctly, he was the one with all of the, yes, because Elliot was on stage. Forsythe was the director, and one of the stories was about all the ways he would prompt his actors, which included coming on stage with the script, throwing open a window on the stage, poking his head out with the script, actually tearing a page out of the script and handing it to an actor and walking off stage, all in different shows, of course. Hirschfeld, which was actually given to Fran, to the wife, who had done, and speaking of women involved in players, she would go down and stay in the basement, but she'd help with all the costume and makeup for a show for 50 years.
On Saturday?
And that was always the impression I got. I need to talk to somebody to confirm it.
These days, I think it's, yes, I think they would all have some sort of invasion of the body snatcher type reaction if a woman walked in.
Oh yes, if she was actually here on Saturday, and my impression was she was, unless she taught them like a final dress, is she stayed down. That was why that room, she stayed there. She did not leave that room. That was her little domain. But you'd have to talk to someone and find out. But every impression I got was that she was like hidden away in the basement. But if you think of Lee Carroll too, she was the power behind the throne for 50 years, almost 50 years.
For who?
She was the office manager here. She would cast the shows.
Really?
Yes. This is a story I've been told by more than one person. Not only did she keep things running, she was part of the reason the records are so clean, because she made sure they were maintained. But she also had, and these still exist somewhere in the files, these index cards that had a player's name and all the things they had done here. And if they had a show that they either couldn't cast or weren't sure how to cast, she'd get that, and she'd start going through the index cards, and she'd start making phone calls. And if Lee Carroll called you and told you were in the show, you did it.
Wonderful.
So you see these people who are involved, even if they're on the periphery, that really do help players run. Now, as for doors, so you have people like Slade. Bill Elliott was on stage. I think Bill Elliott was a dentist in his daily life. You had Forsythe. My favorite story is, of course, Bill Roloff's door. Because he was such a venerable member of the club, and they gave it to him kind of as a joke, but he didn't realize it was a joke, and then no one was going to tell him at that point when he was so touched, because he knew that it was very seldom you got a door while you were alive. This often
Right.
happened after somebody passed away, so somebody giving, having a door, which they'd done for Forsyth. That was such a big deal, and then he finds out that it's the door to the shower that has not worked in a very, very long time, is in extreme disrepair, but this being Bill, he's like, okay, so he goes in and he fixes it up in a working shower, and they were very excited to have a working shower again, and then the board discussed having other doors of the theater named after him, like the boiler room and the kitchen, so that he could work his magic in those spaces.
Just as you say, he's a venerable member. I have missed him entirely, but that's the one member of this place that's the recent enough to have everyone here know who he is. I joined in 2007. It's 2013 now, so everybody here has him in legend status.
Yes.
When they start telling stories about Bill Roloff. It's not as if anyone's insinuating he was a small character at all.
Actually, he wasn't much taller than me, so.
But bigger than life.
Very
in
much bigger than
Players'
life.
history.
He was so involved. He loved players. He loved being on stage. He used to put together a rookie show to get all the new people involved, and exactly what you're talking about, to make sure that they didn't lose new members because they didn't feel like they were involved right at the start. If there was something that needed doing, he would do it. And he was also so gracious. They very much talked about him, and having met him, I can believe this, that he was so gracious and dignified, and he became kind of their example of, this is what it means to be a gentleman. It's not about status, it's about how you deport yourself, how you treat other people, how much care you take with things. When it was needed, Bill would be working in the office. He'd help with the grounds. Whatever was needed, he wanted to be involved. This was really his extended family, and he very much loved this place, and he dedicated a lot of time to it. But he was also fun and funny and had stories, so as much as we talk about venerable members of the club, it makes him think like he's off in his special chair in the corner. He is in the thick of things, and that's really, for players, that's what it is. You're not off in the corner holding court. You are in the middle of everything. So whoever that person is, there are people on stage right now that don't realize in 20 years they're going to be that venerable member everyone is talking about. They're just doing what they do. And that was what Bill was doing. He was just doing what he did. He didn't think about it in those terms. He just wanted everyone to have as good a time as he was having. And when you look at 1975, when he did the anniversary that year, he took such care with what he did with the space and how people were involved and the performances. And that's something to be admired, whatever field you're in. That's something that we could all live up to. But it was definitely kind of an example for players, is this is what it really means to be a player. You want to be Bill Roloff.
There's apparently a fork in the road for some, because there's people who start on that path, and this becomes, their church and family, or their escape, whatever it is, and they hit a wall after this place has just been sacred ground for them, and it's like there's a risk of burnout in a recreational.
But you would see people who had been involved and then they kind of disappear. Or you will hear somebody you knew was very involved in these decades, and then contentious dealings with the board later. And then there's sometimes life just happens, so one of my favorite letters, asking to be reinstated. So the person had to resign for whatever reason, whether it was work or family or whatever. And a couple of years later, life was back under control, and the person wanted to be reinstated, and the letter's hysterical, and it basically says, as far as I know, my tux still fits, I was paid up when I left, and no one was chasing me out the door with torches, so I'm assuming it's okay for me to come back. And that's the kind of, I love that about players, that kind of tongue-in-cheek sense of humor. But as with anything, particularly in theater, it will take as much time as you're willing to give it, and then some. And particularly if you rely too much, because I see this in, say, some of the organizations I deal with where I live now, you've got that person who does that one thing, whether they stage manage or they do props, but they never have any help. Oh, so-and-so will do it. And you just start assuming that they're going to take that over. And there's both the feeling of being taken for granted, and then why are you, it's not that you want people fawning over you, that isn't it. but just that acknowledgement that this really matters and we appreciate that you're doing it and it's so much help to us. That gets lost because, oh, so-and-so always does that. So you don't even think about it. You just know it magically gets done. It's like the theater fairies take care of it. And you hit the point where you feel taken advantage of and taken for granted, and you're just, why are you doing this? If no one seems to even notice or care, if it doesn't matter, then why are you doing that? And some people can manage to get past that, but some people you just get so burned out, or you hit that point instead of people looking at you going, you're getting tired. How about we have so-and-so help you with this, or do you want to take this next show off so you can recover a little because we really want to keep you here. We don't want you to go away, but we also don't want we don't want this to break you. If you don't do that, I have to do that with my students even, where I look at someone and go, if you want to do the next show, that's fine, but I can see this stuff is going on, and it'd probably be very good if you just take some time for yourself. Sometimes you need that, take a step back and breathe, and then when you come back, I was out of the theater out of directing for a year at one point, and the first time I was back in the theater, of course I love what I do, but I didn't realize how much I wasn't living the life that I needed to live until I came back into that first rehearsal. And there's nothing remarkable about that rehearsal. Same things always went wrong, still trying to get the blocking to people. How can you not know your lines at this point? And I sat in the back of the theater at one point, and I was always crying because I was so happy to be home. I was home, but I had needed a little bit of time to be out of it to recognize for all the stress and misery, because there could be a certain amount of that it is worth it, and that's where you get to live. There's something about being more alive in those moments, those very fleeting, it's going to go away, this is your one chance, go for it. But sometimes you lose sight of that, and sometimes you don't get to experience that in the way that you need.
Yeah, I definitely think that still holds, that still holds true here. It's almost as if pure speculation. But if we passed something on the board that said, hey, we're not going to finish in May and start in October. This is, we're going to do June, July, August, and September too. Oh, God. I think people...
It wouldn't do anybody any good, because it would become... There's a local theater that's doing something where I live along those lines, and I have a friend that calls them the theater factory. It's the play factory. It becomes rote, grunt work. There's no joy in it. There's no creation. And creativity takes a certain amount of time. You guys understand this, that you need to learn, you need to enjoy, but you also need to let things just kind of percolate in the back of your head. And when it's time, they'll come forward, but they're going to hang out there for a while. And if you don't give that time to happen, you're never going to get to that level of creativity that you want to get to. And if you just force it through, and because this is a somewhat insular experience here, you do want people to have time to do the things they want to do with their families and not feel like they're trying to take time away from something else that's also important to them. You want them to come here and for it to be joyous. This is fun. I come here to play. And we need play. Play is important. Play is necessary. You can talk to any psychologist, whether you're playing on a team and playing softball or volleyball, or you do theater, or you do something else, or you paint, whatever it is, we need that chance to play. Even as adults, and we ignore that a lot of times, to be healthy and be okay. So we want people to come here and play. We want this to be that part of their life that is joyous, and when it becomes only work, then they've already got work.
Right.
Why are they going to stay here for that? And there are...
That's why we don't do a show in January.
Yes.
Nobody wants to rehearse lines. I just directed. I knew my lines worse after the Thanksgiving break. Up for a December show, you take 4 days, and it's amazing how you can go 4 days without rehearsing them, and it's bad. Mm-hmm. You're worse when you come back. So that's another thing. I think it's one of the greatest things is to you open up with a 1-3 act and 2 frolics, and then you get a break.
Yep.
But family's coming down tonight. Tree trimming, mm-hmm. Preparation for tomorrow's party, and then we have a millionaires party. So things are going on, and there are things that are going on that are inclusive.
Exactly.
To make it. It's not just that place you go where I have no idea how it works.
And that very early on, one of the first invitational productions in Heirlooms in 1913. They were talking about that part of this was just a chance to, really, this is what we're doing. Please come see what we've been working on. So there's always been that sense of, we know that you have a good time. We know that this is your group of friends. what are you guys really doing? Because there's always that sense when people think something is exclusionary, what's really going on? No, really, we're not part of the one world government, I promise you. No, we were just trying to get so-and-so used to walking around in heels, and that took a while. That, that's what's really going on, and that chance to share in that too, because people are proud of what they've done. They work very hard, and they're taking risks. This is hard for a lot of people. This is new. So having that supportive environment and getting a chance to show off, look what I've done.
And it's the disposable part too, because I think, you get to work as a professional every day, and it's sort of like my billable rate is this, and I need to be engaged. You have this mentality coming off of your 55-hour work week, plus or minus, 15 or 20. And there's this, I need to be engaged in productivity because I need to be able to show what I've done every day. And you come down here, well, it's gone, Saturday evening when you go to bed, it's poof, no one's going to see it again, because while they video them, I know of nobody that goes back and watches videos of player plays.
People like me, but no one else.
Are there any other women? I'm really intrigued. That part, I guarantee you, of things that we've talked about that would shock the current membership. A woman in the office doing the casting, somebody downstairs, a woman in the building,
Period.
Except for the cleanup crew at 12:30 at night.
Right. Well, Jake Hirschfeld had a company that did costumes and makeup, and he would do stuff for local productions. Fran was his wife. Both of them worked with players. So it was mostly Jake, and you'll see pictures. There are pictures of Jake putting people in makeup. I've not seen a picture, doesn't mean it doesn't exist, of Fran, but Jake passed away, and Fran kind of took over. So I don't know if Fran was here simultaneously, actually in the theater when Jake was here. Probably not, because then Jake was around. But once he passed away and she was around, I think that because she had been helping so much, she's just stepped in. But Ruth Haight, who became Ruth Haight Hughes, who had been a Rockette, if I remember correctly, and she worked as a choreographer, so she choreographed some of the shows here. She actually married, when I said Hughes, Hughes was a player. She wound up marrying a player who actually joined after she had already started working, doing some choreography for players. So you'll see stuff like that. You'll see, there were players' wives who wrote shows for players.
Really?
Yes. The one I can think of off the top of my head, I don't know that they ever produced, but that wasn't unusual. Elle Week's wife, they did a joint show with Arts and Crafts, I think. If it wasn't Arts, I don't think it was Fine Arts. It could have been Fine Arts and Theater Arts. Either that or it was the Arts and Crafts Society, but they did a joint show. It was a Christmas show. It was a children's show, so they had a mixed cast. And she was involved in that. So they were talking about Mrs. Al. Her name was Vera, but Mrs. Al was involved in the show. So you'll see those shows that are written by, or somebody's significant other, family member contributes whatever. Somebody's son shows up in the show. So Players is a family affair. It isn't just the person who's here. It's also the family that's supporting them while they do that, even if they're never stepping foot in the theater. But so you'll see those names pop up throughout time, and they're just kind of mentioned in passing, like Ruth Haight. It's good. Yeah, so Ruth Haight was awesome. She helped with the choreography for this. And, they just pass on by. Yeah. And in some respects, to me, that means it was common enough that it wasn't. There was a woman helping with choreography. So yes. Ruth came in and did the choreography, and that was that. So
then you mentioned that in '52 or some time they had the whole, wait a minute, we can't have guests down. There was a recent debate on the board about beer's not free, and if you put 40 people down here, but if you want to do a dress, you're going to get a response from an audience. You might have something to work on in the last 48 hours.
It's not only are you going to get a response, people are going to up their game a lot because they know that somebody else is coming. There is both security in performing only for players, but occasionally that can also mean complacence. Oh, they'll forgive me if I flub a line. But knowing that this is that group's one chance to see it, and quite frankly, if we want to talk about beer or whatever costing, I just spent $20 to see a truly atrocious community theater show. It hurt me. My friend was great. The show was awful. I don't think anyone's going to mind, and I know my college did this. They would actually charge for final dress, $1 or $2. Here, give us that. And I think if you charge something minimal to cover, that's truly covering expenses, but it's not trying to make any profit, I don't think anyone's going to care if they spend $4 or $5 to come see a dress. You can't see a movie for that.
Right.
So why am I going to care? Here, take the $5. Please take the $5. to come down, and 30 or 40 people in here for a final dress is going to create an energy and an excitement in that performance. It's also going to drive everyone to do better. That's why people, they always talk about people pulling together for the show, because there's something, it is not about you anymore when you get up and perform. And it's easy to forget that when there isn't a group of people out here that you're performing for. It still feels like a rehearsal. So I don't see the harm in that. It's still a dress rehearsal. Frolic is still frolic. They're not going to be there. Everyone's going to be here in tuxes. You're going to start out with the player's song. It's still going to have all those traditions, and there's nothing, it doesn't hurt those traditions at all. It doesn't take away from those traditions or that experience. That is the true performance. Because that final dress is a final dress, which means you might have to stop, something's going to go wrong, they're going to have to fix it. Everyone knows that.
Right.
It's final, that's okay, that's what it is. We came knowing that that's what it is. And then you have your very special performance that you're only doing once. So
I've seen final dress get less and less formal. Street clothes, holding a script, standing up there, reading it, and it would be probably increase the value of the Saturday show dramatically to say, we're bringing people down, we're going to give them a slice of pizza and a beer and charge them $5, and if they want to, come back for a second round. And it would, I think it would really make me think twice about, no, it's not Saturday. Saturday's not the day I need to know my lines. Thursday's the day I need to know my lines.
Exactly. It's going to drive everyone to really push themselves as much as they can. And that does mean not only that final dress becomes more like a performance and everyone really trying to get as close as they can, that means the Saturday performance is even better, because now everyone's had a taste. Now they're like, we know we can do this. We know that we're going to get laughs. We know that people are going to be excited. And they're going to push themselves even farther because they want to see how much more they can do.
Or, as Thursdays sometimes motivate you in other ways. Not that we know we can do this. It's, holy cow, we've got 48 hours to
pull this together. Well, sometimes you need the kick in the backside.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that, however it works.
It's has there there's these certain the one phrase that I love that has about 10 different meanings down here. It's players, and I don't know how much as a researcher you get experience. It's like, where is he? We said rehearsal was going to be 7 o'clock. It's almost 5:30. It's players, or the you bring a guest and somebody shouts louder. From the back of the room, and then somebody on the other side screams funnier.
Yeah, that sounds. Yeah, it's players.
Is that which I've seen? Some people find very amusing, and some people are just pissed. I spent my time and effort to learn my lines, and I don't need that crap. I don't think it's not done often, but it's and usually I think it has to do with feeling comfortable with who's on the stage, as opposed to a bitter jab from somebody.
Oh yes, because I have seen things along those lines, because you and I have joked about certain consistencies within some of the actors and things they do, such as not learning their lines, and how people are reacting to that. But so having seen some of those performances, because it is kind of a big family, it is like Aunt Millie when somebody's saying grace, telling them to be louder because she can't hear. So it is very much that family atmosphere. And for people who completely understand what they're getting into, I am fine with that, because I understand what this is. For somebody who's used to, just straight theater, that isn't only what this is. The theater's a very big component of it, but there's as much entertainment in the audience as on the stage.
I've seen that.
Not that what's on the stage isn't entertaining, it's just there's just as much out here.
What would somebody who's never walked into the building or ever been a member of a social club like this, why should somebody join?
This is a chance, by just walking in the door and trying to get involved, to be part of history and tradition and creativity, but fun. For all we talk about so you wear a tux, it's fun. So you get to be part of all of these people and this ongoing family and community that has been integral in Detroit, that has had their hands out in various things across the country. but you're going to have fun. And in our increasingly digital world, connections with actual physical human beings to work with people in a way that is playful and joyous, and you get to share. We don't have as many opportunities for that. We think we're more connected than we are. So to be able to come down, to try this out, to have all these people who are cheering you on. Where else do you really go where everyone is on your side for the most part, where they really want you to succeed, where they're going to push you to do new things, and where you can really very quickly become an important part of that group. You can do a lot as an individual. This is not some huge organization. Your part matters. Instantaneously, your part can matter. From the day you walk in the door, and it's as much as you want to get involved or not get involved. But there aren't many places where I think you can do that, where you're going to be welcomed in that quickly, where you're going to be able to become part of the organization, part of the community that fast, while just enjoying yourself, while having fun, while being creative, while doing something that really is very unique. There aren't things like this. This isn't, community theater is not this. This is not community theater. That's not what this is. So there aren't many organizations that really can create this environment the way that this place can.
You know, the descriptions of players are either treehouse, playhouse. It's definitely any word that's coined by one of us for this place is along the lines of a fort.
Yep.
Or but for adults. It really does not. This is not going to the church basement with an auditorium.
Nope.
With people that you don't have a bond.
Nope.
Other than to play roles.
Yeah, that bond forms so quickly. There's such an excitement with working here, but it's also exactly what you said, that playful. Over the years, with some of the things that have hit Detroit, hit the club, there's often that question of, well, why should we do this? Well, I mean, why are we doing this? And we need this. We all need this in some form. And I think that Players does that, come in and get involved and be creative and play and do something joyous so you can go back to your everyday job and do a good job at that because you had that moment where you lived in a different way. And you're going to get to do that on a regular basis. And you know you're going to get to do that. You're going to have that wonderful, joyous experience on a regular basis, whether you're sitting in the audience yelling at somebody to be funnier or louder, or you're on stage, or you're backstage wearing a lab coat over your tux to keep it clean while you're changing the sets. And then, yes, you do go back to your everyday life, but you also have, you have that sitting out there, that moment you're going to get to have over and over and over, and it's different every time. It's very different every time. This isn't even like being on a team where you do also have that sense of camaraderie. I don't want to act like it doesn't exist anywhere else, but it's not the same.
Yeah, because, well, the risk. I think that's the one bond I've always felt after plays.
Oh, yes.
The element
Fear.
of risk. Standing behind and having somebody on the other side of the curtain lead the Players song and say, there's no turning back now. The bar and the roller coasters come down, and I'm going to do this play whether I'm good or not. I wanted to ask. I forgot one of my famous ones that I loved. The George C. Scott. George C. Scott was a guest here, and he was he? Where was he on the spectrum of comfort level of being a guest?
As far as I understand with Scott, he seemed comfortable, but he was also very much his persona. So he was very, I am a tough guy. So they all were kind of very respectful of that tough guy, but they very much felt, they enjoyed having him here, but you still kind of felt that very much. So he seemed to be happy, but it's still, I'm George C. Scott. So there was that sense of that with him. So not quite Nixon's level of friendliness, but also not Bert Lahr's, why am I here? And you see that, and Admiral Byrd came and spoke here because Edsel helped fund one of his trips. And there you'll see people, some of whom we don't necessarily recognize anymore, but famous comedians came through because people like Al Weeks, because he had done some work in Hollywood and Broadway. He knew some people, so he'd bring in people to the Afterglow or bring them in as guests for a performance. So you'd see them, and some of them everyone loved and hoped they came back. Some of the performers did think they'd have to perform, but then not everyone appreciated the performance they gave. One person obviously told a very blue story, and you could tell from the review and the player that you could just see the guy shaking his head going, oh no, please stop, please. And that was actually kind of funny because it was one of the ways they were talking about players, the assumptions that people make. This particular performer assumed, oh, I got this all-male group of people, so they're going to think this is hysterical. And you've got all these people going, no, 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 that's not what we're here for. This is not appropriate for us. We don't know what theater you think you're in, but that's not our theater.
In the research overall, is there anything where, just any odd story that you would think would be worthwhile to be included for posterity? I mean, I know there's probably more than we have time for.
There's more than we have time for, and I'm just trying to think of, I can't think of one story. So there are the theater accidents. One of my favorite ones is a gun misfired, because that, never happens. In fact, there's actually a player show that is nothing but mistakes. All the mistakes that go wrong. So the phone ringing at the wrong time, the curtain coming down at the wrong time, and I'm forgetting the name of the show, but it's hysterical. Again, player-written show. But so you got these two people on stage, very dramatic moment, click, click. So the guy with the pistol starts beating the other guy with the pistol, the guy who's supposed to, just stop, I'll die. Which is such a theater, it is such a theater story. It's such a theater thing that in the moment, something going wrong, but fine, we'll fix it, we'll go on, we'll turn it into a joke. It'll be told to posterity, because now I know the joke, and this happened, I think, in the 1920s. But those are all the kind of, you've got your first moments on stage, the first time somebody's all done up in heels and a dress and trying to deal with the wig. But just those, and then there's the stories they're telling on stage, the response to something going on out there, whether it's popular culture. Martha and Me, I don't know if that's before your time, but that show makes me giggle. It's about Martha's time in prison, and it is hysterical. It's Chris Nisi wrote that. So you have that kind of that response to what's going on. Their responses to things that have happened in the city. Their jokes about one of the Afterglows. I want to say they're guys who used to do a kind of a news report on things going on in the city, and I saw a recording of that. It was hysterical. So you get all of these stories that people are telling about their lives and their world, and it's very familiar because it's our world. And I love seeing that. I love seeing that response, because then it's not these people 60 years ago were doing something. It's these people who live exactly where I live. We're dealing with the same things we're dealing with now. For all we think we've changed, it's still very familiar. And I really enjoy that. It makes them real. It makes the history real to me. It gives me a better sense of place and connectivity, which is what I think Players does really well, that connection to place, that connection to this group and the history that they're involved with. Because it is a small place. It is an intimate space. It is a small group, and you really are going to learn those stories and be part of that history. People talk about members of the club they've never met. Bill Roloff is probably now one of them too. They talk about them like they've met them even when they haven't. When I came here, I swear it was a good year before I realized that Sam Slade was not only not alive, but hadn't been for a very long time, because of the way people spoke about him. I had no idea, because he was part of the story being told, and so much part of the story that he is very much alive, just like Bill is very much alive. And other people who might not be with us anymore, their steins are upstairs with black ribbons across them, but they're here. And they live on in the people in the shows and their involvement. And that's something wonderful about that can happen, that they still are here in that way. And then there's also that sense that means we're still going to be here to another generation who are going to talk about us in that same way. And some poor person then is going to go, wait, you mean this person lived when?
Right. No, I know Weeks had his own show. He had the it was a Weeks frolic.
Yes.
With 3 weeks shows, which we sit and a couple of people have talked in amazement about. What do you do to pull that off?
Weeks did it. Bud Pierce did it. I want to say Meacham did it. So you've got this. You really do have this treasure trove of dramatic literature, of some things that have been done once and they're sitting in a drawer, and they're really good and funny. I mean, is some stuff dated? Sure, some stuff is dated, but a lot of this stuff is much better than you realize. And like I said, I told you about the satire about Ford Motor and the dealing with the unions, but there was also, in that same piece, there was something called a Lunch at the Detroit Club, and it was poking fun at the Detroit Club because the membership had gotten so aged that they couldn't quite keep up with the bodies anymore, and they couldn't tell. I think somebody dies during the skit, and they just kind of move around them. They joke about the fact that they kept running the flag on the building down to half-mast whenever somebody passed away, and they did it so often that planes thought they were being signaled and were landing nearby. So you also get little moments like that where you can see them joking about some very local institution.
All right. That's anything.
That's some great stuff.
Anything you recall?
No,
From last time that you...
since we're still rolling, maybe you can, because I know in the beginning of the last one you talked about how you came to even write the book about players. Like,
We were
what
a
was your...
girl running up and down the. I remember you were quite young.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
yes.
Tell that
How did you
story.
come to see this place?
Okay, so I was 17 when I graduated high school, and because I was 17, my mother was rather freaked out about the idea of me going away to school, so she and I had cut a deal that I would go stay here for a semester, and I went to University of Detroit Mercy, and then after that I was going to go on to Loyola Chicago, which is what I did. But since I was home, and since my high school was wonderful and prepared me very well, I actually had time, which was a new thing to me, and I wanted to be involved in theater. So there was a children's theater, and since I was still 17, even though I was in college, I could be involved. So I called them up, and I wound up essentially kind of being like assistant director, stage manager for them. And we worked at one of the members' homes, and then they had rented out this theater for performances. So I'm running sound and lights, I'm helping out with various things to keep everyone in the cast on track. So I'm running up and down, I'm in the booth, I'm down the stairs, I'm running down, helping out with makeup, helping somebody get into costume, running back up. And of course, as you do this, you trip across the size 13 heels in the dressing room, and you notice that the chorus girls in the leggy caricatures have hairy legs. And at some point, you finally ask the question, wait, what kind of theater is this? You think it's really pretty, but you're like, and somebody, well, it's a club. Well, what kind of club is this? Well, it's an all-male club. I'm like, wait, what? It's an all-male club that does theater. Really? And I thought that was fascinating, really cool, and then I went off to Chicago. But I came back here to do my PhD, and Wayne State is very smart. The first week you're there in their PhD program, they sit you down, look at you, and go, okay, tell us what your dissertation is going to be, because we're going to start talking about it now. And whatever you pick something that is very accessible to you. I loved theater history. That had been my focus for all the years I've been studying. I said, there's this theater. I know about them, but I don't know if they're still running. I don't know what's going on. I said, it's the Players, and I happen to work on children's shows there. And one of my professors said, oh yeah, I know somebody who is at Wayne State as a professor, and he's on their board. He got me in touch with Bill Voles. So I went to Bill and said, I'm interested, if possible, if there's material, I'd like to see if I can't write a history on your theater. But understanding that it was an all-male club, I didn't know. So he brought me into a board meeting. Everyone was thrilled and excited, and I also got the, how do you even know about us question. And I explained that I had spent a lot of time running up and down the hallways and looking at everything here. And they opened up their archives to me. Absolutely, come in. I'd come in, I'd go through the files, I'd be down going through the pictures, I'd be upstairs. I spent a lot of time here. They let me send out questionnaires to everyone who was a member. They let me talk to people. They invited me to invitationals. And the second anyone knew what I was doing, they're like, oh, you're the one. I have a story for you. Okay, this is perfect. I don't even have to seek them out. They come find me. And so you'd hear all these wonderful stories. And, I'm trying to scribble them down so I don't forget, and I remember the person who tells me. So for me, it was so important to be able to create. People have a sense of their history, but they didn't really have a sense of the breadth of the history here. And the amount of creativity and the kinds of shows. And to be able to create that, what I was hoping to do, to me, I'm creating a starting point for other people now. You can start here and you can go farther because now you've got the basic information. There hadn't been a list of all the members. So compiling a list of the members was brutal. But that hadn't existed, so it was just trying to create a baseline of, here are all these wonderful things that you have. Now go run with that. Go find out more. Find out more about the people. Find out more about the plays that I didn't have time to read, because there is a limit. Find out more about how you tie into the history.
Wonderful. Thank you
You're welcome.
so much again.